Good morning. I'm just going to continue my series on the 2014 World Championship between Magnus Carlsen, the champion, and Viswanathan Anand, Vishy Anand, the challenger. The first game was a draw. Anand had a good chance, but Carlsen managed to save the situation with a repetition. And in the second game, Carlsen convincingly won by breaking down Anand's Berlin Wall. So this is the third game. Let's see if Anand can strike back immediately. So d4, knight f6, c4, pretty standard stuff, e6, knight f3, the so-called anti-Nimzo-Indian variation. It's very popular among the best grandmasters, is if they play knight to c3, then the bishop comes and pins it, and they're threatening to take the knight and double the pawns and work against the doubled pawns. The idea behind the Nimzo-Indian. But plays knight to f3, so Carlsen plays d5. Queen's gambit declined. The knight comes to c3, the Anglo-Indian variation. Queen's gambit declined, 3 knights variation. 3 knights because 1, 2, 3 knights are in play. Bishop comes to f4. This London type move is part of the Harwitz attack, and he's looking at the squares c7 and b8. Castles, e3 to support the pawn, and also support this pawn with the bishop. Knight comes to d7 and c5. This is the blockade line. The idea is that white is going to try and create a passed pawn and force it through. So c6, the pawn is blockaded. Bishop comes to d3 and the pawn is attacked with b6, supported by b4. That pawn is attacked with a5, supported with a3. Of course, none of this works if the knight or the bishop are still home, because then when he takes, you take back, the rook is lost. But because they're out, it works. So the bishop comes out, bishops are swapped, rook comes to a6. Maybe now Carlsen might be threatening to play queen to a8 and swap off. So the pawn comes to b5, it's got to be taken, and white has created his passed pawn. The game becomes a fight over can that passed pawn be forced through or not. Queen to c8, so that if this is taken, this is taken. You take mine, I'll take yours, kind of thing. So yeah, and Carlsen would gain at least a pawn by that. So he doesn't do that. So the pawn comes to c7. Yeah, good. Yeah, it's one square away from being a queen. It's, really powerful pawn. And pawn comes to b4 to threaten the knight, and the knight comes in to b5 to support the pawn on c7. So it's now supported by the bishop and the knight. And I would say equally importantly, the knight prevents the rook from coming to a7 to attack the pawn on c7. Pawn comes to a4 and the rook comes to c1. He adds another defender to that pawn. So it's his strongest point, it's his most important piece. He can't defend it too much. Overprotection, as Nimzowitsch used to say. So yeah, the rook comes to c1, the knight comes to e4. A good square for the knight. Maybe he might be able to think about at some point in time playing knight here to cut off the support for the pawn. Oh. Excuse me. So the knight comes to g5. Importantly, to attack this pawn, as well as this pawn and this pawn, but I think the important attack is against this pawn. So knight d comes to f6, so that the queen is now defending this point. Pawn is taken, knight is taken, knight is taken back, and the knight is chased away. And Carlsen says, you take mine, I'll take yours. Vishy agrees to that, and the rook is taken. And now the queen takes and threatens the rook. The rook has to come back to a5, where he threatens the queen, and the queen comes to c6, and now he's got queen, rook, and bishop all supporting the pawn. Black creates his own pass pawn. It's only 2 away. Is he going to be able to force through his? Takes the pawn, the rook takes, and the queen takes, and now the pass pawn has a little less support, and this pawn has no less support. Queen comes to d7, mainly so that he can put the rook behind this pawn to stop it from going anywhere, but also so that he can then think about maybe playing bishop here and cutting off the support for that bishop. So he castles, the rook comes to c8, and the rook comes to c6 so that the bishop can't come to d6. Pawn comes to g5, attacking the bishop. The bishop retreats, and the pawn comes to bishop. The bishop comes to b4. Obviously, queen can't take it, otherwise the rook will fall. So the rook attacks the pawn on a2, and the bishop attacks the queen. Obviously, still can't take, or the rook would be lost. But also the bishop is defended by the rook. So yeah, queen comes to a6, and bishop takes the pawn. So he's managed to get rid of the passed pawn on the 7th, but in so doing, he's given himself a pin. So if the bishop moves, the rook is lost behind. Pawn comes c5 to cut off the bishop. It's taken. The rook takes. Yeah, probably the best he's got. Pawn takes. Queen comes c7. Pawn comes to e6. Great, even better than tripling up immediately. It just creates another threat. King has to come to f8, and now Vishy puts on his best Emperor Palpatine voice and says, "Look at the power of my fully functional Alekhine gun." No, he didn't do that, and it isn't technically an Alekhine's gun because the queen is in the middle. Technically, the queen should be furthest back so that they're more effective, but it doesn't matter because, you know, you can't defend the pawn or the bishop on c7 any longer, and yeah, if he moves the bishop, then he's going to lose the rook. And so even if he plays bishop takes h2 check, the king takes, the rook takes the rook, the queen takes the rook, he's still a whole rook down, and the pawn on a2 is completely irrelevant, and the pawn on f7 is still under threat. So Magnus resigned, and that was Vishy's first win against Magnus in the World Championship in either of their matches. And Vishy, who was always known as the Tiger of Madras, shows that the tiger still has claws. Don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe to my videos. Thanks. Bye.